When a homeless child shouted, "Don't eat that," no one expected what would happen next. In the heat of the afternoon, a corner of the park was the meeting point of São Paulo's elite. Between prune trees and the murmur of a fountain, the restaurant was packed. Waiters in impeccable uniforms glided between tables, balancing trays with gourmet dishes and freshly brewed coffee. The air smelled of warm bread and the sweet scent of flowers, but to one man, none of this mattered. At a central table sat Ricardo Albuquerque, a name synonymous with power and fortune. He had built his empire from scratch, starting with real estate in his 20s and expanding into businesses that few dared to dream of. At 72, he exuded the confidence of someone who not only owned his world, but perhaps the world of everyone around him. His impeccable suit and gold-rimmed glasses reflected a life of luxury. Still, as he looked at the menu, his movements were slow, almost hesitant. Across from him was Natalia, his much younger wife, a woman who looked like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. Her black hair framed a flawlessly made-up face with vibrant red lipstick. Every detail screamed elegance, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. She twirled a diamond bracelet on her wrist, distracted, her attention glued to her phone screen. Nearby, a boy watched from outside the restaurant gate. He was small for his age, wearing a sweatshirt far too big for his thin frame. His dark eyes jumped from table to table, analyzing plates and pockets, looking for an opportunity. His name was Mateus, though no one in the restaurant knew him. His face was familiar on that street, a homeless kid, always on the margins of conversations and concerns. Ricardo looked at his watch. "Lost in thought again," he said, his voice calm but firm. Natalia looked up and smiled, showing no affection. "I'm here," she replied sweetly, reaching for his hand. "You know how much I love these lunches." Mateus's stomach growled. He stepped closer, his footsteps almost silent, leaning on the patio gate. His eyes landed on Ricardo's table, the kind of meal he hadn't seen up close in months. A white bowl of soup with fresh bread on the side, and a glass of sparkling water. But then something strange happened. While Ricardo adjusted his glasses and picked up his phone, Natalia's hand slid into her designer purse. Mateus saw her fingers close around a small vial. She opened it with a casual motion, tilting her hand over the steaming bowl. The liquid mixed into the soup instantly, vanishing as if it had never existed. Mateus held his breath. He froze, watching as she stirred the soup with the spoon, her expression unchanged. Then she leaned toward Ricardo, her voice low but audible. "After all the trouble I went through, you're not going to ruin it now." The boy blinked, unsure of what he had just witnessed. Could it be real? A woman so perfect, sitting in such an elegant place. Would she really be capable of that? Mateus couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. His heart pounded as he crouched behind the gate. He didn't know exactly what he had seen, but the coldness in the woman's words made him shudder. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. No one else noticed. No one else was paying attention. Only him. The soft growl in his stomach brought him back to reality, but his eyes stayed fixed on the couple. Ricardo looked tired, distracted. His spoon hovered above the bowl while he stared at his phone. Natalia was all charm and poise, her bright smile, and her hand resting on her chin as if she hadn't just whispered something chilling. Mateus felt the weight of the decision on his shoulders. His instincts screamed at him to walk away. Why get involved? Who would believe a kid like him, wearing a worn-out hoodie, standing at the edge of a world that didn't welcome him? He swallowed hard, glancing at the other patrons, laughter, conversations, the clinking of glasses. No one cared, no one even noticed him, but his eyes returned to Ricardo's spoon, now dipping into the soup. Mateus felt his chest tighten. It wasn't his imagination. He saw the woman put something in there. He knew what would happen if the old man ate it. His thoughts raced. He didn't know the man, but that didn't matter. Wrong was wrong. Time seemed to crawl. Then, without thinking, Mateus moved away from the gate and walked straight toward the table. His legs felt like lead, but his feet didn't stop. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Don't eat that!" Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The clatter of a dropped fork echoed through the restaurant. Ricardo paused with the spoon inches from his mouth. His wide eyes locked onto the boy. Natalia's head whipped around, her expression hardening. "What did you just say?" she demanded sharply. Mateusz didn't hesitate. His voice trembled, but was loud enough for everyone to hear. "She put something in your food. I saw it. Don't eat it." Whispers spread through the restaurant as the diners turned toward the scene. The silence that followed was suffocating. Mateusz stood firm, his chest heaving as adrenaline surged through his body. Ricardo blinked, looking from the boy to his wife. "What is he talking about?" he asked, his voice calm but his hand shaking as he set the spoon down. Natalia's composure snapped like an overstretched rubber band. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the stone floor. "You little liar!" she hissed, venom in her voice. "How dare you accuse me of something so vile? Who let you in here?" The words stung, but Mateusz didn't flinch. His eyes remained fixed on Ricardo, desperate for him to see the truth. "I saw her. She poured something into your soup when you weren't looking. You can smell it if you don't believe me." Ricardo's face paled as he turned to his wife, his eyes narrowing. "Natalia, what's going on?" he asked, his voice low but firm. She scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "He just wants to cause trouble. Look at him. He probably just wants money or food." She spat, her gaze returning to Mateusz with contempt. But the boy didn't waver. He stepped closer to the table, fists clenched. "I'm not lying," he said firmly, his voice rising. "She doesn't want you to know, but I saw everything." Ricardo's hand hovered over the bowl, torn between disbelief and the seed of doubt now planted in his mind. But something in the boy's tone made him hesitate. The air around the table thickened. The once lively restaurant had fallen silent. All eyes were on the scene, their meals forgotten. Ricardo leaned back in his chair, studying the boy with an analytical gaze. His face bore the marks of a man used to people playing games with him, trying to take advantage of his wealth. But this was different. The boy didn't flinch, he didn't look away. "Mateusz?" Ricardo asked, his voice firm, though tinged with suspicion. The boy nodded. "Yes, I'm telling the truth. Please don't eat." Natalia let out a bitter laugh, crossing her arms as she stared him down. "This is ridiculous," she snapped coldly. "He's just a street kid looking for attention. You're really going to listen to this nonsense?" But Ricardo didn't respond. Instead, he picked up the spoon again, bringing it close to his face. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the silent storm brewing within him. "Natalia," he said slowly, his eyes meeting hers. "You heard him. What exactly is going on here?" Natalia's mask cracked even more, her lips pressing into a tight line. "I can't believe you're asking me that. It's an insult," she said. She turned to the crowd, her voice rising. "He's lying. Look at him. He probably doesn't even know who you are. Why would you trust him over me?" Her words hung heavy in the air but had no effect. The crowd murmured, eyes darting between the three. Whispers floated. Could she really have done it? Look at her. She looks nervous. That kid doesn't seem like he's lying. The whispers only fueled Natalia's fury. She slammed her hands on the table, her impeccable posture crumbling. "Enough of this," she snapped. "Ricardo, eat that damn soup and let's go." But Mateusz didn't back down. He stepped forward again, fists clenched. "If you don't believe me, then call someone to test it," he said, his voice rising in urgency. "You're rich. You have lawyers, doctors, people who can find out. But don't eat it. If you do, you'll regret it." Ricardo's jaw tightened as he turned to the bowl. The spoon was still in his hand, but he didn't lift it too. His lips, his tired, calculating eyes turned to his wife. "Natalia," he said in a low voice, "you've been acting strange for weeks." Her face flushed, and she stammered, I don't know what you're talking about. You really think I'd poison you?" "Poison me," Ricardo finished for her, his tone sharp. The crowd gasped audibly, their whispers rising. Mateus stood firm, his gaze unwavering. He felt his heart pounding but didn't let it show. He had done what he could. Now it was up to Ricardo to take the next step. Natalia straightened, her expression hardening, becoming cold and hostile. "This is ridiculous. I don't have to stay here and listen to this nonsense," she said, grabbing her purse. But before she could leave, Ricardo's hand extended, gripping her wrist with surprising strength for a man his age. "You're not going anywhere," he said firmly. "Not until we figure out what's going on here." The waiter, who had been frozen, finally spoke. "Sir, should I call the police?" The question sent a wave of tension through the restaurant, and for the first time, Natalia seemed genuinely desperate. She shook her head violently. "Don't you dare do that. It's just a misunderstanding. Ricardo, you can't be serious." But Ricardo raised his hand, silencing her. "Yes," he said, addressing the waiter without taking his eyes off Natalia. "Call them!" Mateus felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. The truth had not yet come to light, and the tension was far from over. The restaurant held its breath as the waiter ran inside to make the call. Ricardo released Natalia's wrist, his eyes never leaving hers. The impeccable charm she wore so easily was now crumbling, replaced by a growing sense of despair. She looked around, her lips moving but no sound coming out, desperately searching for an escape. Meanwhile, Mateus stood a few steps away, his hands trembling slightly. He had done everything he could, but now the weight of doubt was creeping in. What if the man didn't believe him after all? What if she got away with this? He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay put. "Mateus," said Ricardo suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension. "You said you saw her put something in the soup. Can you describe it?" The boy nodded quickly, stepping forward. "It was a small bottle, like a medicine vial, with a clear liquid. She poured it in when you were looking at your phone and stirred the soup. I swear I saw it." Ricardo's face tightened. He turned to Natalia, who was already shaking her head. "This is absurd. He's lying. Why would I—" But Ricardo interrupted. "Why would he lie? What could he possibly gain from this?" The crowd murmured again, and the sound of sirens in the distance intensified the charged atmosphere. Natalia's eyes darted toward the soup, and for a split second, her carefully constructed facade completely crumbled. She looked cornered. Then, as if clinging to a last hope, she turned to Mateus. "You were spying on us, weren't you? Trying to cause trouble because you're jealous of people who actually have something." The words hit Mateus like a slap, but he stood his ground. "I'm not jealous," he said firmly. "I saw what I saw, and I couldn't just stand by and let you hurt him." The sirens grew louder, and soon 2 police officers entered the restaurant. The room seemed to shrink as they approached the table, their hands resting on their belts. "What's going on here?" one of them asked in a neutral but authoritative tone. Ricardo stood up, his imposing figure still commanding respect despite his age. "Officers, I need you to take a look at this," he said, gesturing toward the bowl of soup. "This boy claims my wife poisoned it." The officers exchanged a glance, their expressions carefully neutral. One of them leaned in, cautiously sniffed the soup, then turned to Natalia. "Ma'am, do you have anything to say about this?" Her face turned red. "This is ridiculous. He's just a street kid trying to cause trouble. Ricardo, are you really going to let this nonsense go this far?" But the officer wasn't buying her excuses. "We need to test the contents," he said, picking up the bowl. "No!" Natalia shouted, her voice rising. The outburst drew even more attention, and her sudden panic only made her appear more guilty. The officer hesitated, narrowing his eyes. "Ma'am, is there something you'd like to tell us before we proceed?" Natalia hesitated, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She looked at Ricardo, then at the officers, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. Finally, her resolve broke. "Fine," she spat, her voice low but laced with venom. "You want the truth? I'm tired of living in his shadow, tired of his control over everything. He was never supposed to make it past this year. And She stopped abruptly, realizing too late that she had said too much. The restaurant erupted in gasps, some patrons pulling out their phones to record the scene. Ricardo's face went pale as the weight of her confession hit him like a truck. The officer stepped forward, his expression grim. "Ma'am, I'm placing you under arrest for attempted murder. Please put your hands where I can see them." Natalia's composure completely broke. She screamed, trying to break free as they handcuffed her. "You don't understand. I deserved everything he had. Everything!" she shouted as they took her away, her voice echoing through the stunned restaurant. Ricardo sank into his chair, his hand trembling as he pushed the soup away. For a moment he said nothing, his face a mask of disbelief and betrayal. Then his eyes met Mateus, who stood frozen, unsure of what to do. But when Ricardo's gaze softened, a flicker of gratitude replaced the anger in his expression. Mateus hadn't just saved his life, he had revealed a truth Ricardo would never have seen. The restaurant slowly returned to a low murmur as the officers escorted Natalia out, her protests fading into the distance. Patrons exchanged wide-eyed glances, still shocked by what they had just witnessed. Some looked at Ricardo with pity, others with curiosity, but Mateus didn't move. He stood still, unsure whether to stay or leave. Quietly, Ricardo turned to the boy, his face still pale but his eyes now steady. "Mateus," he said softly, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Sit down." Mateus hesitated, eyeing the curious onlookers, but Ricardo's voice carried a weight that made him obey. Slowly, he sat down, his shoulders tense. "You saved my life," Ricardo said in a low but firm voice. "I don't know how to thank you." Mateus shifted, his hands gripping the edge of the table. I just couldn't let it happen," he said quietly. "I couldn't just watch and do nothing." Ricardo nodded, his gaze distant for a moment as if reliving the whole ordeal. "Most people would have," he said after a pause. "They would have looked away, pretended they didn't see. But you didn't. That took courage." Mateus shrugged, his voice barely above a whisper. "I guess I just don't like seeing people get hurt." "That's all?" Ricardo leaned back, studying the boy. For the first time, he truly saw him, not just as a ragged street kid, but as someone with a story, a soul. "How long have you been around here?" The question caught Mateus off guard. He looked away, his voice tinged with embarrassment. "Ah." Ricardo frowned but didn't press. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black phone. "Wait here," he said, getting up and stepping away to make a call. Mateus watched, unsure of what to do, his heart pounding with anxiety. Was he in trouble now? Was Ricardo calling someone to remove him? But when Ricardo returned, his expression was calm, almost kind. "Help is on the way," he said simply. "Help?" Mateus asked, frowning. Ricardo nodded. "I called someone I trust. They'll make sure you have a place to sleep tonight, a safe place. And if you'll let me, I'd like to do more than that." The boy's eyes widened. You don't have to do that," he said quickly, his voice defensive. "I didn't do it for money or anything." Ricardo smiled faintly. "I know. That's why I want to help you. You did something most people wouldn't have done. And trust me, Mateus, if the world had more people like you, it would be a much better place." For the first time in a long while, Mateus felt a warmth he couldn't describe. He looked down, unsure of what to say. The restaurant patrons began to disperse, but the weight of what had happened lingered in the air. Ricardo picked up his glass of water, taking a sip before speaking again. "Sometimes life gives us a chance to change someone else's story," he said thoughtfully. "You changed mine today, Mateus, and maybe, just maybe, I can help change yours." The boy looked at him, his dark eyes shining with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: hope. As the two remained in silence, the sun continued its path across the sky, casting long shadows over the restaurant. The lesson was not lost on anyone who had witnessed the event. Courage doesn't always wear a suit, and kindness doesn't always come from the wealthy. Sometimes it's the people we ignore who have the greatest strength of all. In the end, Mateus's bravery didn't just save a life, it reminded everyone in that restaurant of the power of standing up for what's right, no matter the odds. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more tales of courage, truth, and redemption. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that even small actions can create life-changing impacts.